Greetings from the study, my office here at Gloria Dei. I wanted to point your attention particularly to this cross that's on my wall. This cross and this style of art is associated with El Salvador. And March 24th, we commemorate Bishop Oscar Romero. He was Bishop of El Salvador back in the late 70s and was killed in 1980. He's known as one of the three great martyrs of the Christian faith of the 20th century, along with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s and the Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer in the 1940s. And I sat down to talk via Zoom with Pastor Katharine, one of our Gloria Dei members, to talk about liberation theology and ministry in the Latin American context, where she served in Peru for 13 years. And so here's, by way of a reflection and meditation on this March 24th commemoration of Oscar Romero, Pastor Katharine in conversation.
Yes, in 1985, I joined a study tour with other people of the church of different denominations, mostly Lutherans. And Brian Rude was one of the persons who organized it. We had been classmates at seminary together. And so I went along, and he was very interested in liberation theology, as were all the people, and it was a great emphasis of all the people that we met, that we talked to, because it was really at its height at the time, I guess. So we went to various countries in Central America, and we also went to El Salvador. And most of the people who talked to us about liberation theology. And liberation theology was a theology that said what the gospel teaches us is that Christ came to give us freedom and liberty, and not to be oppressed like the people in Central America were at the time. It really sprang from some theologians looking at the situation at the time in Central America, where, well, still some of it still exists, but there were dictators like Somoza in Nicaragua and others, and the wealthy were doing fine, and there was a great gap, a very large gap between the poor and the rich. And the church too was it was mainly Roman Catholic, and the attitude had been for a long time that well, the people did not read the Bible. Partly some of them couldn't read, but they had no Bibles, and the church did not teach the Bible. They told the people, you just do what we say. Come and have the Eucharist. You must come to Mass. You must pray this and this. You must follow these rituals and do these rites, and then you'll be fine. And the priest will tell you what you're supposed to believe. You don't think about it yourself. And that's what the liberation theologians wanted to change. And it's called the preferential option for the poor, where they say that God is on the side of the poor. And really that God has a preference for the poor because they're poor and can't have things for themselves. That Jesus was also talking about the physical conditions of people and that they should have enough. Right. And Margaret Kreller, who was my predecessor, Pastor Margaret Kreller from Kitchener, she said, one of her favorite verses that she would say was when Jesus said, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. And that includes material things also. And it's not that you're religious to get material things, but it's wrong that some should have a lot and the poor have nothing. So God stands with the poor. And so that's a lot that we learned. And so one of the ways that the new, the people who were the priests and the church leaders who followed liberation theology, they formed groups in the church or outside in people's homes and gathered the poor people, the campesinos, anybody together, and they would read the Bible and then talk about it. And the people themselves they'd read the passage, and then the people would say, well, this is what it means to me. And this is what it means to us. And it wasn't that before it had just been the priest told you what you were supposed to see and believe in that. And they were very much encouraged to explore, and they had such wonderful ideas also. I'm sure you know the book about the gospel in Solentiname. Yeah, it's a group of people with the priest Ernesto Cardenal, who was one of the radical leaders of liberation theology. And I'll just see if I can find a picture from, I kind of like this one here. Okay, here's Jesus being arrested. I don't know if that comes very well.
Yeah.
And the people say, after reading the passage, those who arrested Jesus led him before Caiaphas, the chief of the priests, where the teachers of the law and elders were gathered. And one of the people says, that sounds like the military court that's operating in Managua. So they related the passages to what was happening to them at the time. I mentioned Reverend Dr. Brian Rude,
Yes.
who's working in El Salvador. This is when I was in Peru, and he came to visit me one time. Well, it was on this trip in 1985 that he talked to the Lutheran bishop, Medardo Gomez, about the possibility of him going to El Salvador and working in the church there, where there was, so that's when he did go. He went about, I think, 1987. And he's almost been there ever since. He was expelled for 1 year when there was conflict. But that trip really, I think, strengthened in his mind that that's what he wanted to do, was work with the poor in El Salvador. Yeah.
Yeah.
And his example inspired me too, partly to go to Peru. So now one of the leaders of liberation theology is Gustavo Gutierrez, and he's a Peruvian priest. He's a Dominican, and he's the one who wrote the book, the Theology of Liberation. And that's the book that really spread around the world. And he's one of the people, the premier, what do you call it? Proponents. That's what I was going to say, opponents, but I didn't want to say proponents of liberation theology. And and he started an institute in Lima called La Casa de Bartolomé de las Casas. And that was a monk or a priest, I forget what, long time ago. And he's one of the first who said the indigenous people of Peru were actually human. They should be treated as people. They were human beings.
Right.
That picture that I showed you with Margaret and myself and Gustavo Gutierrez, that was in 1996 when a group of Canadian Lutherans came down to Peru. to visit. And we had a meeting with Gustavo Gutierrez. And so I sent you another picture of a conference that we used to always attend every year.
Yep.
Well, at least for some years, called our summer course.
Yes.
And this one was called "The Faces of the Poor Today," and it was really, really good as I remember it. And we had different groups. We met in different groups. They're mostly Roman Catholics. It was a conference from the university, the Catholic University in Lima. But Gustavo Gutierrez was prominent and also spoke there. So those are the pictures, yeah. And they converted him. He was converted by the poor.
Right.
And yeah, he's I think, is he made a saint yet? But he's, people in El Salvador and elsewhere are I think he's been beatified or whatever. Anyway, but he was, yes, a scholar, an academic, a priest that was quite reserved. And as I understand it, he more taught at the universities and so on than was a parish priest. But when he became was appointed the Archbishop of El Salvador, as you said, the poor converted him, because he had been a friend with a lot of the wealthy people, and they expected that he would, just carry on and be good to them, help them out, and not criticize them. But yeah, he stood up for them, and he was killed for that by it would be the government and the military that shot him in a chapel, and he was saying mass. And part of what converted him was that one of his very good friends, couple of his very good friends who were priests, worked in the villages and worked for the poor, and they were, saying this is wrong what was happening, and this caused a lot of the powers that be in the military did not like that, and his friend Rutilio Grande was murdered, and that made him look more and more. And one day in the pulpit, he said to the soldiers, "Stop the killing." I forget exact words, but it was very powerful. He said, "Stop the killing." And I'm talking directly to you, he said to the soldiers in the military. And but then he was shot actually saying mass in a chapel where it's I don't know, it's a convent, but it was where the nuns were. So the congregation was the congregation of nuns, and the soldier just came in and shot him. Yes, it changed quite a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Not everything, but
right. Yeah.
And as I said to you before, I think this theology inspired a number of the North American Lutheran pastors who went down to work in the church in Peru, to go there and work among the poor, because the Peruvians said to me too that the Canadians and some people from the United States, they didn't live the way the missionaries before had done, or some others that they had seen. That they tried to live in a very much more ordinary way, or not in such luxury and so on. Now I'll just tell I don't know if you want this, but I'll tell you this story anyway. You can add it or not. Sure. To live a much more simple life than but anyway, when my brother John came to visit me in Peru, and he came on my street, and he said, oh, this is a slum. And I lived, well, it was sort of lower middle class, you know. And then he went to the place to Marques, where I was helping in the congregation. And when he came back, he said, no, this isn't a slum. And then when the people from Marques came to visit in my house, which was extremely simple, they were said, oh, I hope we we can have a house like this, you know. But a lot of the Roman Catholic religious too, I knew some, and they actually lived on the hills and on the shanty towns, and they tried to live just like the people there lived, and they just went and lived there among them. Mm-hmm. There is a change. Yeah, I knew lots of people in the Roman Catholic Church who were, you know, working with the poor and much more simple and more attuned to liberation theology. That's where it came from anyway in the beginning. I think that contrast is really something. First, my brother saying, this is a slum, and the people in Marques saying, oh, I wish we could live in a house like this, you know.
True. Yeah. God and Lord of the earth, rouse yourself and demonstrate justice. Give the arrogant what they deserve. Silence all malevolent boasting. See how some you love are broken, for they know the weight of oppression. Even widows and orphans are murdered, and poor strangers are innocent victims. Those who crush your people delight, claiming God above takes no notice. They proclaim that heaven is blind, that the God of Jacob is silent. Stupid fools, when will you listen? Now take heed, you ignorant people. God, who gave us sight and hearing, has observed and noted what happened. God the Lord will not stay away, nor forsake his well-beloved people. Heaven's justice soon will appear, and the pure in heart will embrace it. Yes, the ones whom God instructed, who revere and study God's word, will be saved from all that harms them, while a pit is dug for the wicked. Should the wrong change places with right, and the courts play host to corruption, should the innocent fear for their lives, while the guilty smile at their scheming, still the Lord will be your refuge, be your strength and courage and tower. Though your foot should verge on slipping, God will cherish, keep, and protect.